having had success with the first one, yay! I want to talk a little bit more on pneumatology in conversation with this chapter on the Holy Spirit in engaging theology. There's a whole lot more that could be said, but so like at the top of 148, there's their little sidebar heading, the Spirit as fully God and truly a person. Now they're pretty stuck on this person thing, and you might think that, well, that sounds great, but I'm gonna poke at it a little bit. I think it's we will say that the divine nature of the Spirit, or Spirit is truly God, was under heavy debate, particularly in the 4th century. They mention Gregory of Nazianzus as critical in that, in arguing for the divine nature of the Spirit. Not to say that Gregory undoubtedly did have something to say about this. I think that more typically we look to another one of the Cappadocian fathers, his friend Basil of Caesarea, as the primary theological champion of arguing for the divine nature of the Holy Spirit against the pneumatologians, those who were the opposers of the Spirit. I think they're mentioned on page 152. You even get the word there, pneumatologian, which is a nice, it's a nice word. You may never run into it again in your life. I don't know. But they're on the top of 152, I think it was, or 148. And they end that little side note with, since the Spirit is a person, we use the pronoun he rather than the pronoun it to refer to him. Later they'll acknowledge that the terms ruach and pneuma both are feminine terms. So, not that I'm saying we should use she, but it's just as good as saying he, in my judgment. And really, the point might be that they're obsessing a little bit too much on the category of the personal. Why would I say that? Well, let's go to top of page 153. There, you find that they talk a little bit about Saint Augustine. This is at the top paragraph, and that Augustine is very famous, and he is, for having suggested something like God the Father as the lover, God the Son as the beloved one, and God the Spirit as the bond of love between Father and Son. And they then say, well, some, perhaps rightly, have critiqued Augustine's love model for depersonalizing the Spirit, Father, Son, and then the love that binds them. Is that a person like Father and Son? They go on to say, this characterization of the Spirit as the bond of love is one of the most repeated descriptions of the Spirit in Western Christian theology. Well, if it seems to compromise the personhood of the Spirit, why would it be such an enduring description or model? Well, let us consider a few things under the heading of pneumatology. In the Old Testament, the Spirit is referred to sometimes just as the Spirit. God can speak and say, my Spirit. God talks about, we read in Joel, I will pour out my Spirit upon all flesh. The Spirit is identified as the Spirit of the Lord or of Yahweh on many occasions. So you have those designations, right? Then we, including the Holy Spirit, on more than a few occasions. So you have these different designations for the Spirit. And you move to the New Testament. And of course, Holy Spirit is used more in the New Testament than the Old, but it carries over. Same with the Spirit and the Spirit of God. Um, you can find all of those designations for the Spirit in the New Testament as well as the Old. Now, here's some that are unique to the New Testament. The Spirit of Christ. You can find that in Romans. In Galatians, Paul talks about God pouring out the Spirit of His Son into our hearts, crying Abba Father. It's clear that he means the Holy Spirit, but here it's the Spirit of God's Son. Jesus says to his disciples in one case in one of the Gospels, we may have talked about this in class, but it's fascinating that there are 3 different places, 2 in Luke and 1 probably in Matthew, where we read about Jesus saying to his disciples something like, don't worry ahead of time what to say when you're brought before, judges or the Sanhedrin or whoever it might be. Don't worry because, and so in one case it's don't worry because, I want to get this right, the Holy Spirit will give you the words. Okay, the Holy Spirit. Then in another passage parallel to it, same idea, don't worry ahead of time what you'll say, because, I quote, Jesus says to the disciples, the Spirit of your Father will give you utterance. Okay? Holy Spirit, Spirit of your Father, or we might say the Spirit of the Father, but interestingly in that case Jesus saying to the disciples, the Spirit of your Father will give you the words to say. And in the third instance, and I know this one's in Luke, so it's a repeat. There's 2 of them in Luke. And in this third one, Jesus says, don't worry, because I'll give you the words to say. Slippery referential language for the Spirit. Okay? Then you add in that in both the Old and New Testaments, we may have mentioned this in class, but I don't think this should be overlooked, that there are a lot of naturalistic images for the Spirit, by which I mean the Spirit as a dove, the Spirit as flame, the Spirit as oil, as wind or breath, the Spirit as water. So the language of the Spirit really gets impoverished and narrowed down if people say, this is a person, and this is a person like alongside the other persons of the Trinity. And one of the mistakes they're making continually, honestly, it blows my mind. They are using the word person very uncritically. So on page 1, by uncritically, well, I'll tell you what I mean. On 153, first gray box, fully divine and fully human, question mark. If the Spirit is fully God and truly a person, and what they're forgetting, I guess, is that the term person, which is derived from a Latin term, persona, is not synonymous with what we mean when we say person now. It's just not. They're using it like, I'm a person, you're a person, the Father's a person, the Son's a person. Hello, remember that we say that God is 3 persons, but we don't say God is 3 people. That's important. It tells us something. We're using the term person in a very unique way. So if the Spirit is fully God and truly a person, does that mean that the Spirit, like Christ, is fully divine and fully human? No. Only Christ became incarnate as a human. Good. The Spirit is a person, but not a human. Well, tell us what you think you mean by person here, because person does not mean the same thing as, well, what does it mean? And that's part of the problem. We don't really know in this case. Not all persons are humans. Angels are persons and not human. If the Father is a person and the Son is a person, the Spirit is just as much a person and not an it. Here'd be the point. The use of the term person in the guarded way of theological tradition it can include it. It's not reducible to human personhood. I don't think we recognize how easily we make ourselves the measure of what's the good and the best and the highest. Give it a break, human beings. We're so good at patting ourselves on the back. They are over elevating the idea of the personal. I think it says more about the Spirit, not less, to say that the Spirit is not tied down to language of human person or personality. Can I mention again water, dove, breath, wind, spirit, flame, oil? And the Spirit sometimes is called faceless, if you will, because the Spirit can be called the Spirit of your Father, the Spirit of the Son, the Spirit of Christ. There's even a place, I think, in the book of Acts and maybe also Philippians where the Spirit is called the Spirit of Jesus Christ. So the Spirit is not like this third guy person, him, alongside of the Son and the Father. The only, strictly speaking, him of all those is the one who became a human and lived among us, is Jesus of Nazareth. It doesn't mean that we can't use the term person for all three, the first, second, and third persons of the Trinity, but we just have to recognize that we're using that word in a very distinct and unique to God kind of way. And let us be aware of not creating God in our image, though we have been created in God's image. We cannot return the compliment and reverse the process. That's what happens too often when there's an obsession about the language of person and personal, as though our experience as human being persons is the measure of, like what God should be. God infinitely transcends human personality. We're so good at dragging God down to our level. But the Spirit certainly should, we should be able to see that the whole Holy Spirit language in the Bible resists all of that temptation. Well, I hope this makes sense to some extent. I'll add that, the big debate between the Western Latin-speaking church, pardon my congestion and all, and the Eastern Greek-speaking church on the procession of the Holy Spirit. The Eastern church has always insisted that the Spirit proceeds from God the Father. At some point, the Latin-speaking church unilaterally decided to add in from the Father and the Son, and the the Latin there is filioque, like our word, a filial relationship is a family relationship, so filioque and the Son. And I think the best way to understand this is in an Augustinian way. The West isn't saying, okay, you have the Father and the Son, and that the Spirit proceeds or issues forth from them individually, like from two different fountains, but rather in this Augustinian way of the Father and the Son in their mutual love, that the Spirit is the Spirit of that love of mutuality, so that the Spirit proceeds from, not from the Father and the Son, but from the Father and the Son. The Spirit is the gift of this love, living, active love of God, the mystery of Father-Son sociality in God's own being gifted to us. And that's what I think, at least at its best, the Western Latin-speaking church meant by adding "and the Son," so that it also gives us a little bit more Jesus shape to our understanding of the Spirit, which brings us back to where we started with the first video, that testing the spirits has to do with whether the person claiming to speak by the power of the Holy Spirit is pointing the hearers to the incarnate Word among us, Jesus of Nazareth, in his words and deeds, such that then we can say that we believe that the Holy Spirit always will direct us toward Jesus as God's ultimate word, communication, and revelation.